As I said, I've got a panel for you who's forgotten more than the UN knows on this subject. National Senator Matt Canavan and Senior Research Fellow at the Menzies Research Centre, columnist to The Australian, Nick Cater. It was a barnstorming speech, Matt Canavan. I said it was like a bunker buster, aimed right in the middle of woke old UN. I could hear them sort of, cringing, and the nails were scraping, and it's just beautiful to watch. Most of it, I have to say too, delivered without a note. Please tell me this is the moment where we say, finally, the Emperor of climate change has no clothes.
Here in this country, though, to win this battle. But what should be clear from this contribution is that the United States is not going to take any serious action on climate change anytime soon. There can be a tendency to sheet everything home to Donald Trump when people look at US politics, but it's been very clear for a long time that there's not a single voice within the Republican Party that is calling for radical action on climate change, certainly going nowhere near things like net zero. So that always means the US is not going to be a reliable partner on this ridiculous agenda. Now, we've tried to skate over that. Our party room, my party room, was told that we had to sign up to net zero a few years ago by Scott Morrison because Joe Biden got elected and promised it. Well, what's happened today should be a lesson that we should never set our own policy settings based on the election results in other countries. We should set them on what is important and most beneficial to the Australian people. And what is very clear now is that this agenda, the net zero agenda, is failing Australians. And today we saw that our inflation figures came out, and we saw that electricity prices in Australia went up by 24% in the past 12 months. 24%. I think we should end this net zero agenda, not because of anything Donald Trump said in New York, but because of what it's saying, what it's doing to your power bills when they turn up every quarter.
Yeah, I agree with you that we've got to drive our own agenda here, but the weight of US emissions in the global numbers, right, and the fact that you've got China and India and Russia also out of the frame, it just seems absolutely futile if 60 to 65% of the world emitters, heavy emitters, are doing, sweet bugger all, and we in Australia are basically de-industrialising at pace to virtue signal and make Chris Bowen feel good swanning around at cocktail parties in New York. It is absolutely crazy because the people, as you rightly say, bearing the pain are those that are copying these 24% increases in their power bills. And I noticed, Nick Cater, even today, former Labor Minister Joel Fitzgibbon was on TV on Sky, and he couldn't walk away from the truth of what Trump had to say. As much as he didn't like it, he had to admit there's a lot of truth in what he said. Have a listen.
I disagree with him when he says the science is in doubt with respect to climate change and mankind's contribution. But the science on how we deal and respond to climate change is contested, and he makes some solid and valid points there.
And he's right, Nick.
Well, he is, and I think that much is absolutely right. You don't need to go all the way with Donald Trump that climate change itself is a hoax. You've just got to look, the solution is a hoax. We know that. I mean, Matt's just given the figures on electricity bills, but in so many other ways, we just know that the whole IPCC process is corrupted. It's not achieving anything. In fact, emissions have gone up an enormous amount since the IPCC was set up. And in this country, they flatlined in the last 3 years. For all the huffing and puffing, we have moved the dial nowhere on this. So the whole process is totally flawed. And I think people like Joel Fitzgibbon, indeed anybody who looks at this with an open mind, would say we've got to look at this another way. If we're concerned about this, or some are more concerned than others, but if you're concerned about this, what sort of action do you want? Not just we need action. Tell us what you're going to do that's different.
And Nick, you know and I know that there's a whole ecosystem of grifters out there that have been living off the teat of public money into climate change, right? So that's how they justify their existence. It's been going on for 30 years now. That's how they fund their organisations. The last thing they want is this problem solved, right? It's like the Indigenous politics economy as well. They don't ever want peace. They don't want people to get along. They don't want one Australia. They want a constant story of division. So part of this has been redistribution of wealth. There's no doubt about that. But also, you know, and you look at it now with the rollout of renewables, it's subsidy-based payments from poor old taxpayers that keep this money go round in business.
That's right, Peter. And look, you mentioned people who actually earn their living from this climate change business. You wouldn't even guess the number. Academics, for a start, people running various think tanks, various quasi-organisations, people in the finance industry developed to it, and then, of course, the renewable energy people themselves. It's a huge number of people who will lose their jobs if this conventional wisdom is ever overturned. So they have every incentive not to do it. And the example is Joe Biden. There was nobody in Joe Biden's office that was prepared to say the absolute truth about him because they knew they'd lose their jobs if this was taken on board. So never underestimate the self-interest involved in keeping this whole caravan moving, even though it's increasingly coming off the rails.
And I will mention there is a number out today, the Australian Financial Review. This is just in Australia, and its forward commitments over the next 3 years. It is $76 billion state and federal, this country alone, in just the next 3 years. Matt, they are losing the argument. I think people are waking up because they're seeing the personal impact of these policies on their power bill and in their home. That's why they now want to stop you and I from talking on air and online about climate change. And you know what this is about, because they're saying it's misinformation that's going to hold back the urgent war on climate change.
Well, exactly right, Peter. Nothing says that you're winning an argument like seeking to silence and criminalise the speech of your political opponents, does it? I mean, this is a sign that they are losing this debate. They're losing it because they're losing it on the facts. I mean, they're effectively now, those that are seeking to continue this failed net zero agenda are effectively asking people to not believe their lying eyes. I mean, we can all see it in front of us. We're losing a manufacturing industry, we're deindustrialising, our electricity bills are through the roof. I was just comparing my power bill with a mate in Japan a few weeks ago, and in Japan now they are paying less for electricity than we are here in Australia. We're the biggest supplier of energy needs to Japan. We supply 30% of their electricity needs from our coal and gas, yet they're paying less. How does that work? In 20 years ago, electricity prices in Japan were 4 times they were in Australia, 20 years ago. So this is just failing. And that's why now, because they've failed in reality, they're trying to suppress dissent in virtually online. And I've got a classic one for you here, Peter. I've been going through the submissions of the Senate inquiry on this at the moment. And the Queensland University of Technology, they've got a thing called the Digital Media Research Centre, I think it is. They've claimed that I engaged in misinformation on Sky News. They said I was the Deputy Leader of the Nationals in doing this. I am not and have never been the Deputy Leader of the Nationals Party. So if you're going to claim people are engaging in misinformation, you might want to get your facts right first too.
Just before we go on to another topic with Nick, the distressed sale of assets in wind and solar, that's also made the news today. Yeah,
that's a huge story. And distressed sale, these things are in trouble. The renewables are not making the money they should be if they're the cheapest form of energy. And I wrote about this in The Australian on Monday. I believe that the wind industry is almost over because the finance companies are just not willing to put the money up for that amount of money and the returns that they get, which are often, as you know, negative prices during the day. They basically have to pay to pump electricity into the grid. It's not worth it, and I don't think that any amount of subsidy is going to get that over the line. The only good news in this is that the 70-odd billion that the government has so far put aside for this, a lot of that isn't going to get spent because nobody's going to do these projects even with that subsidy.
Matt, just quickly, Matt Canavan, given you're in the party room that Nick and I are not when the Liberals will have a debate about this issue. Andrew Hastie said the other day he reckons he's in the minority in his opposition to net zero. I'm not going to disclose who I speak to, but I speak to a lot of your colleagues, and I can't find hardly anyone, and I'm ringing moderates too, who are absolutely dying in a ditch to defend net zero. And I say to them, stop being squibs. I might be stronger than that on the phone. Get out there and publicly say what you're privately saying to me, because it's weak, right? It's weak. It's weak to say, oh, we think this thing's all BS, but we've got to do this to hold these seats, or we've got to do that to get back in the game. I think Australians have had enough. I think they want an honest and open and very frank conversation about where this is headed now.
Well, you're right, Peter, and no one could accuse you of being a shrinking violet. Look, last week I think net zero in the coalition party room effectively died. We're just waiting to administer the last rites now, because last week the coalition, Susan Ley, the leadership, the shadow cabinet, came out very, very strongly and opposed Labor's 2035 emission targets. We did so after just a few hours of consideration, so I'm not sure why we can't come to a position on net zero with as much alacrity. But regardless, exactly, we're now in a position of opposing the 2035 targets. We can't then commit to net zero just 15 years later.
Right, I'll leave it there. And Nick Cater, I'll see you later on at the Menzies dinner, and we'll both hear from Toby Young. Thanks, both of you, for joining me now.